Sunday morning on BBC Radio Scotland.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Sunday Morning with me, Zara Janjua. On the show today, one of Scotland's most prolific and popular writers, Sir Alexander McCall Smith, will be revealing his spiritual life. Paul McNamee, editor of The Big Issue, will be talking about an inspirational piece of music. Before 10, we'll also be looking deeper into some news stories of the past week with a more ethical and philosophical perspective with guests Amanda Sondy, Fiona Stewart and Laura Young. In a few minutes to mark Pride Month, Chris Cregan and Ellen Golford will be with me discussing how attitudes have changed towards LGBT plus communities over the years. But of course, we have lots and lots of great music coming up too, starting with this track from Cass Elliot with Make Your Own Kind of Music.
Nobody can tell you there's only one song worth singing. They may try and sell you, 'cause it hangs them up to see someone like you. But you gotta make your own kind of music, sing your own special song, make your own kind of music, even if nobody else sings along. You're gonna be nowhere, the loneliest kind of lonely. It may be rough going just to do your thing, the hardest thing to do. But you gotta make your own kind of music, sing your own special song, make your own kind of music, even if nobody else sings along. So if you cannot take my hand, and if you must be going, I will understand. You gotta make your own kind of music, sing your own special song, make your own kind of music, even if nobody else sings along. You gotta make your own kind of music, sing your own special song.
Oh, that was a strong start for us on the show this morning. That was Make Your Own Kind of Music by Cass Elliot. Now, it's Pride Month and thousands upon thousands took to the capital streets yesterday for the annual Pride March. It's a celebration that people from LGBT plus communities who grew up a few decades ago probably could not have imagined. But those LGBT plus elders, what did they think of the progress that's been made, and how have attitudes towards sexuality when they were growing up shaped who they are today? Well, I'm joined by activists and writers Ellen Galford and Chris Cregan. A warm welcome to both of you this morning. How are you?
Morning. Good.
Hi, good to have you with us. Now, Chris, you were out celebrating yesterday, weren't you, in the streets of Edinburgh? What did you make of the Pride celebrations?
I was, yeah. I went up to the McEwan Hall and to the celebrations there, and I was kind of reflecting on how a lot has changed, and in a sense, not much has changed. I think the visibility was really interesting. There was a sense in which we were visible in a way that felt much safer than it did maybe 40 years ago when I was first involved in Pride. I think the other thing, you used the word celebration. I think for me back then, when I first went on a Pride march back in the early 80s, it was a protest.
Yeah.
More than a celebration. I'm sure we partied and we enjoyed partying, but first and foremost, for me, it was a protest march. You know, we had no rights then. You could be sacked, you could be evicted, marriage wasn't even on the agenda. So we were marching against prejudice and discrimination, and we were marching for rights, and that was that was different yesterday. It did feel more like a celebration. That's not a bad thing, but it's just a kind of shift.
No, I'm glad you've picked up on it as well, because certainly, you know, for people today, it certainly does appear to be this glorious celebration of colour. You see the rainbow flags, there's music, you know, people dress up, and, you know, it's something that is very welcomed in the calendar. People look forward to it and they plan for it. What about you, Ellen? What do you think of the current Pride celebrations?
Well, I think they're wonderful and exuberant and would have at one point been science fiction.
Yeah.
It would have been a fantasy. The first Pride March I went to was down in London. We were having to go down from Scotland because we wouldn't have had a Pride March here. So that was in 79. And it was indeed, as Chris says, it was very much, this was protest. I mean, there were women who, if they came out as lesbians and had children, were losing their kids. And as Chris says, you could lose a job. In some cases, there was a lot of hostility. People could lose their families, their touch with their parents. You would be a pariah. It was a period when the change was just beginning. It was really a sort of cusp. And so I found going on those marches, I suppose, I don't think of myself as a po-faced, serious, don't love fun person, but I've tended, I suppose I've been to many, many, many Pride marches, and I found somehow I was perhaps less motivated sometimes when it was celebratory. I thought, right, okay, there's something else I want to be doing today. And certainly I still remember vividly one of the first, I think it was the first Edinburgh one, was that 95? Somebody looking at some of us and saying, oh, girls, you've not made much of an effort. You've not got dressed up. And I thought, oh, come on. My idea of dressed up being a particular kind of lesbian of a certain vintage was, kind of jeans that were perhaps not as faded as the other jeans. That was dressing up.
Well, I mean, it sounds dressed up to me.
Yeah.
That sounds dressed up to me as well. I would say that we are calling you both elders, and I hope you don't mind in the community. But it's so. This is why we want to have this discussion with you both, and already I can see just that value you've been bringing to this, because, in terms of offering perspective on what it was like, it's still relatively recent history. I mean, very recent. And obviously, Chris, you said, in some ways things have changed, in other ways they haven't. So for you, what is it that hasn't changed?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's kind of undeniable that we've come an awful long way. I first went on a Pride March in the early 80s, and we've come a long way since those days. We've seen a huge shift in attitudes, and if you look at probably the most reliable indicator of the shift in attitudes, the British Social Attitudes Survey, which asks about attitudes to same-sex relations. In 1983, when that survey started, only 17% of respondents thought that same-sex relations were never wrong. And now that figure's around about 67, 68%, I think, at the last count. Now, actually, the shift in attitudes has stagnated. So over the last nearly a decade now, we haven't seen much in the way of progress in terms of that shift in attitudes. So
why do you think that is?
I think rights don't yet feel like, not all rights yet feel like a settled matter. And I think for as long as that's the case, then I think there will still be a kind of an emotional burden for LGBT folk. I think we've got a lot to do to eradicate discrimination. We've got a lot to do to embed progress in institutions. So the words are there. Sometimes the spaces between the words are not there.
Yeah, your thoughts, Ellen?
Well, I think because there was a time when you felt a lot of windows were opening. I suppose because my vintage, I am older than Chris. I was born late in the first half of the 20th century. And it was being on the cusp of the love that dare not speak its name, or any names given to it, were absolutely nasty and horrific ones. The images were so negative. The concept of who you might be if you were not 100% heterosexual, heading for marriage and socially useful post-war, regenerating the human supply, then, you were a pariah. And if things were just in, say, the 60s, when I more or less came of age, in my teens, there was just that point where things were starting. If you knew where to look, there were directions you could go in intellectually and culturally. There were starting to be writing and conversations of different kinds. That it was a time when windows are opening, and I think what I worry about now, because as you can tell, my accent is not native. I've lived most of my life in Scotland, but I started out in the provincial, couthy, narrow-minded New York area, and came over here to come out in the bright lights of Edinburgh. But
You were in your 20s when you moved here.
yeah,
as
I
well,
moved.
weren't
I
you?
moved here. I was like 23. Yeah, so it's a long, long time ago. But there was that period when you really things were just starting. There was a lot of rebellion against stereotypes, and there was a counterculture, and it was countering a lot of different repressive things that I think had been post-war 50s, high levels of conformity, the rise of the suburbs, and then suddenly there were ways to look past that, just a few. There were interesting things being written, there were conversations, there were acts of defiance, and there was things like Vietnam, which made
my
people
goodness,
look at
yeah.
authority and think, the grown-ups aren't always right.
Well, there were these huge, big sort of macro events at the time that were shifting the landscape as well in many times. And I think it's what you're doing is actually raising a very important point that I think we should dive into a bit more. And it's your own personal experience of this and the impact that had on you growing up. I'd like to come to you, Chris, because you grew up in England. And, you were a teenager in the 70s.
I was.
What was that like? What were the sort of general attitudes like? And how did you feel about being a gay man then?
So I think the words I'd use to describe that experience would be words like concealment, like deception, like having to deceive others about who you were, hiding who you were, having to fit in, doing everything you could to fit in, because even the faintest whiff of a suspicion that you might be different, then you're subject to the sort of playground banter of puff and homo and so on. So, and I learned really early on, don't let any of this out, don't speak. I remember I made a mistake, I think when I was about 12 or 13, in acknowledging that I might quite like David Cassidy to a school friend, and the look I had. Now, I mean, in a way, I'm glad I made that mistake, because I sure as hell didn't make it again. And so it was really pretty tough.
There was no protection for you at that time either, was there? So
None.
it's
None. None.
you weren't just scared of being a social pariah. It was really that there were quite real consequences for you, as you'd previously outlined.
Absolutely, none. And there was nowhere to go. There was nobody to talk to. And the consequence of that for me, in the small town I grew up in, about 20 miles outside Manchester, was that finally, at the age of 17, I sought sex in a public toilet with an older man. That was the best chance I had. There was just no chance of having a boyfriend or acknowledging that in kind of everyday life. So I kind of discovered that there were these places, underground places you could go, and I went there and I did that. And remember, I mean, I came out, I was lucky enough, I suppose, because many people didn't. They were too fearful. I came out when I was 18, the summer before I went to university, and then I went to university and it kind of exploded from there on. I got involved in lesbian and gay politics, but it was still against the law. The law hadn't changed
And
at
so
that
you
point.
felt like you were forced to undertake sort of risky situations just to keep yourself underground, to keep your secret a secret.
Absolutely, and the rest of the time, you had to fit in. I mean, I got very involved in sport. I mean, I love sport, but actually part of the reason why I became so sporty as a teenager was because it was a good disguise.
Yeah. There's a legacy to that as well, isn't there? That concealment, not feeling like you fit in, having to pretend to be someone else. Ellen, you grew up in New Jersey, I think it was. I was in New York for the Stonewall 50. I was there for the Pride celebrations a few years ago, and it was huge, but that was kind of where it all started, wasn't it? So, what was life like for you growing up?
Well,
there?
growing up, I just was seen as sort of weird. I did not feel I had any way to fit in. And I'm not sure that was at that stage anything to do with sexuality. I mean, it was just, if you were a girl who raised your hand to talk in class and acted like you had some interest beyond giggling and boys and stuff, you were already a pariah. Never mind what other deeper things about relationships might have been going on. And like a lot of women and also men of my generation, which I think I would put myself as probably the old previous generation from Chris, is a lot of us had there was what was known, a very wise writer called it the age of compulsory heterosexuality. You often didn't know yourself what you were because the only negative, the images were so negative. You got what were movies with these horrible, they tended to be either mad, bad, or suicidal women. Always hideous. Or you had scary gym teachers who, you would say, ooh, she must be one of those. She's standing there with a tick list, checking us off as we go into ticking off our names to make sure we've had a shower after basketball. There was a lot of hideous bigotry. There were movies where the sinister killer was either a lesbian or disabled, preferably a lesbian in a wheelchair. And so it was so toxic that it took a long way to climb out from inside the mud that was around the whole subject to think, okay, well, actually, maybe this is who I am. And yet you found often many of us, male and female, and people who would not necessarily define themselves as either, and at that stage there was no language for, that we all many of us got on the wrong trains, and it took well into our 20s or beyond to get off those trains.
I mean, in some ways, the shift that you've seen, the visibility, Chris, that you first mentioned when we started the conversation, that it does seem that there is more, and that's potentially been embraced by and through arts and culture. That celebratory theme that we get now, very different to what it was like for both of you growing up and how you felt. The legacy certainly of Pride has turned into very much a celebration. But how much is arts and culture a part of that? Do you think that you see yourself presented now in television in less of a scary way? Chris, are there true representations?
I think you didn't see it then. You didn't, or at any rate, you didn't see a version of yourself that you recognised. You certainly didn't see a version of the person who you thought you were that you aspired to. And of course, the very negative representations that there were for the most part back then, insofar as there were any, they were then played out again in the playground. So, you'd watch this stuff on the television at night with these stereotypes, and then they get played back to you in the playground the next morning. And, I think that's changed a lot in terms of arts and culture. It hasn't changed enough yet in terms of sport, for example. So, back then when I'm a runner. I've been a runner all my life. I wouldn't have dreamed of telling my teammates that I thought I might be gay. That's very different now. But in some sports, football's the most obvious example. We've got such a long way to go. And I do think, with reference to what Ellen was just saying, no amount of progress, whether that's in terms of the enactment of rights or pardoning, no amount of progress you never quite move on from some of that earlier trauma. It's still there. There's a kind of an echo of it. I'm fine. My life's fine, but there's still a kind of echo of it. As I say to people, I'm married now. Who would have thought? I'm married to a man. And occasionally I'll use the word husband, and I do it quite consciously because I think, I think that's important, in terms of, putting the ladder back down to those who've still got to climb it up. I still think, husband? Somebody might just think, what?
I'm certainly hoping and thinking you mustn't get too many of those reactions.
You just get the odd moment. But even a couple of years ago, sorry,
not at all.
A couple of years ago, I'm out on the street in Newtown, Edinburgh, and somebody sidles up to me, a guy sidles up to me and says, "Oi, effing gay boy."
Oh, wow.
And I'm 61 and I'm kind of comfortable in my own skin, and I'm thinking, where did that come from? And your gaydar must be better than mine, mate.
The thing is, I think for so many of us now, though, it's lovely to be able to embrace Pride. I was mentioning I travelled to America to enjoy Stonewall 50, and I think certainly seeing the city come alive yesterday just felt really wonderful and really special, and I hope that all of that visibility goes towards changing things even more, and you start to see those figures shift. But thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you both on the programme this morning. Thank you for sharing your insights with us, and we hope to have you back very soon. That was Chris Cregan and Ellen Galford. It was very great to speak to you. And of course, happy Pride Month. Happy Pride.
Thank you.
Now, some music. This is Erasure with Now, Paul McNamee is the editor of The Big Issue, and despite a passion for contemporary music, including a stint at music magazine NME, the track that he's chosen as part of our Inspirations series is just a little bit different. The series gives people the chance to share a song, object, or piece of work that's meaningful to them. Paul has chosen a choral arrangement that has long enchanted him.
I am a great believer in moments of change in your life, moments that something opens and you see everything differently and your brain becomes slightly rewired. I have chosen Allegri's Miserere, the Miserere Me, which is a piece of music written some point in the 1630s by Gregorio Allegri, an Italian composer who was at that time in charge of choral music for the Vatican. And this piece is particularly significant because it was written for Holy Week, and for about 100 years or more, as legend has it, it was locked into the Vatican, and the popes were so taken by this piece of music that nobody was allowed to perform it outside of the Vatican, which was all very well until 1770, when a young fella called Mozart knocked up at the Vatican. On one Holy Wednesday, he heard this piece of music, and according to his father Leopold, Mozart heard the piece of music once and went home and from memory wrote it down, which made it the first significant piece of bootleg music, really, that was ever noted. And also Mozart said to have added different embellishments to it, a high C that has become significant in it. When it hits you, when the first high C is met, and this idea that Allegri was trying to both seek forgiveness and then get closer to God, you do feel this strange transition from where you were to where you can get to. I heard it, I think, by chance on Radio 3, but I heard it and I thought, that might be the most amazing piece of music I have ever heard. My boss at Big Issue is a guy called John Bird, and we used to have different meetings around the country. And we tended to meet in cathedral cities because we both got an interest in ecclesiastical architecture. On this particular meeting, we decided to meet in Cambridge nearby him, and after the meeting I had a little time left, and before I got my flight back I thought, I'm going to go to see if I can just take a look around King's College. And I got to it and it was Ash Wednesday. So I went in and I sat down in this beautiful mini cathedral place. And as I was sitting there, I just heard this sound from behind my head. And I thought, that sounds like the Miserere. And I turned round, and as I turned round, walking towards me was the choir of King's College holding candles, singing the Miserere in their choir robes. And I just thought, this is incredible. So moving, so simple. So I was sitting in this growing darkness with these people with candles singing this piece of music that for hundreds of years had signified so much to so many people. And I just burst into tears. But I couldn't think of any other response. It felt the most natural and honest response to that moment, and it still does. We all move at such incredible pace. It can be very hard and it can be very damaging, and it'll either make you tougher or it'll break you. And neither are particularly positive things. So to allow yourself to step back, even if you can't quite explain why it is that you're doing that, is a really enriching, magical thing, and I encourage that. I don't know if I do it enough, but I think the potential for that kind of moment is there.
Wasn't that just beautiful? Paul McNamee, the editor of The Big Issue, from NME magazine, to this beautiful choral arrangement. The song you heard there was Allegri's Miserere, performed by the Tallis Scholars. Now you're listening to Sunday Morning with me, Sarah Janjua, and it is 8:32 a.m. Coming up at 10 is The Sunday Show with Fiona Stocker and Martin Geisler. And Fiona joins me now to share with us what's coming up. What is happening this morning, Fiona?
Good morning. Well, it is, of course, make or break day for Scotland. We'll be building up to that big one tonight, Sarah. Scotland's men take on Hungary in Stuttgart tonight. The last of the Euros group names will be live in the city from 10 o'clock. And we're going to be hearing from fans who are heading to the game. Also, it's general election time. You'll have noticed less than a fortnight away now. We'll continue our leader interviews on the Sunday show. This week, it's the turn of Douglas Ross from the Scottish Conservatives and Scottish Labour's Anas Sarwar. Our resident pollster, Ilsa Henderson, will be crunching the numbers for us and looking at the trend of polls and what they're saying. Lots to get through in the Sunday papers this morning. We're going to have Jason Allardyce. He's former editor of the Sunday Times. He's now with the Childlight Global Child Safety Institute. We've also got Penny Taylor, a regular reviewer on this show. She's a health journalist. And Gina Davidson, she's Scotland political editor for LBC. So we're with you from 10 o'clock this morning.
Oh, it sounds like another busy morning for you,
It is
Fiona.
indeed,
As
yes.
always, wonderful. We look forward to that. Thank you
Thanks,
very
have a
much.
good one.
Coming up at 10. Now, for bookworms, this morning's Spiritual Life guest is a treat. Alexander McCall Smith is a best-selling novelist, poet and librettist, best known for his series combining the worlds of Botswana and Edinburgh and the #1 Ladies Detective Agency series. And 2024 has already been a very, very busy year for him. The Perfect Passion Company, published in February this year, is the start of a brand new series set in Edinburgh. And The Conditions of Unconditional Love, published this month, is a new novel in the Isabel Dalhousie series. His next novel, The Winds from Further West, is due to be published in August. With book sales close to 28 million copies in 47 languages, and with multiple stage, screen and radio adaptations of his works, I caught up with him just a couple of days ago and began by asking him what fueled his drive to write.
Well, it's something that I feel I just want to do. I think when people ask me that, 1,000 words an hour, that's the way I work. I'm not boasting about it, it's just the way it is. So I would probably do about 3,000 words a day, something of that sort. And there are days when I do rather more than that.
It's quite extraordinary, actually. Many years ago, I was interviewing John Byrne and noticed his shoes, there's the paint on them and his fingernails. And I realised then, you know, if you want to be a great artist, you really have to do it every single day, don't you?
You have to be prepared to work very hard at it. It's not altogether easy. It is a pleasure, but it does involve hard work. You have to sit there and you have to write, and it's no good waiting for the muse to come and tap you on the shoulder, because she doesn't do that. So you have to have a system, you have to follow a routine, and you have to be prepared to sacrifice other things in order to do it.
And what's fascinating is, before your career as an author, you had a hugely successful academic career, didn't you? And that was in medical law. What drew you to this field?
Well, I was a professor of law at the University of Edinburgh, and I was very interested in various aspects of law that touched upon medical practice and developments in medicine and in science. And I discovered that was a field that had all sorts of interesting aspects to it. There was a lot of human interest in it. There were a lot of questions of a moral nature. So it really took one into fascinating areas of bioethics, moral philosophy in general. So that was a whole separate career. In my spare time, I was writing, though, so I was a writer throughout that period, but the writing was very subsidiary to the academic work. And then what happened was that my books, my novels, started to take off, particularly the #1 Ladies Detective Agency, my Botswana series, took off in a fairly dramatic way, and I had to make a decision then about whether I was going to continue to be a university lecturer or professor or a writer.
And so was that a difficult decision?
I think a decision to change the direction of one's career is always difficult. And I found it quite hard because I very much enjoyed what I was doing. I liked contact with the students. I liked the discussions that we had. I liked the research that I was engaged in, and so on. But I felt that I had to respond to something that was happening to me.
You said that you really enjoyed the conversations you had with many of your students, and in your new book, The Conditions of Unconditional Love, there's a really fantastic quote in that I wondered if we could connect with, which was, you can't go out of the house without tripping over a philosophical question. I wondered if you were having many of these with your students, but also does writing sort of reflect your interest in how we navigate moral choices? Are we constantly faced with those in everyday life?
Yes, I think that's right. That particular quote refers to Isabel Dalhousie, who's a moral philosopher. She edits a journal of applied ethics, and she is always finding these moral, ethical problems that she needs to do something about. And I think that that is the case with most of us as we go through our daily life. We encounter these questions at every point. You've only got to walk down the street and you'll see moral issues before you. For example, there may be somebody on the street sitting there who's begging. What do you do? How do you respond to that? Or you may see some egregious example of bad behaviour, people doing unkind things to other people, that sort of thing. This occurs throughout our daily lives. And these may seem to be little moral problems, but they are quite interesting ones. So I find that very fertile bit of territory as a novelist.
Was questioning part of your upbringing, because you grew up in Zimbabwe in a Christian household? What was the influence of religion on you then?
Well, I had, like so many people, particularly people of that generation, I had religious influences in my childhood, and I'm glad that I did. I don't reject them. The influences that I had were indeed enlightened, so I don't find anything that I regret in that respect. I suppose I'm very pleased that I was exposed to one particular document, so to speak, one text, the Book of Common Prayer, in its traditional language, because that is absolutely beautiful English prose, as, of course, is the King James Bible. That biblical language is absolutely wonderful. What a pity that we've got it and it's being replaced with computer speak.
So religion has obviously influenced your writing as well as your life.
Well, I suppose it has. I'm not one who makes a particular point of mentioning religion. I don't really mention it very much in the books. In fact, you probably won't see overt references to it. In the Number One Ladies Detective Agency, you will see that Precious Ramotswe, the principal character, she goes to church, and I mentioned that she goes to church, and every so often she talks about her idea of heaven. There, what I'm doing is I'm trying to portray what somebody in her situation, a woman living in Botswana today, would think and do. And so if you look at Botswana, you'll see that they're very, very keen churchgoers. The majority of the population actually subscribes to the Christian religion in one form or another. There are other beliefs in the background which are animistic, traditional beliefs, pantheistic type beliefs. So when I portray the people from Botswana, it would be a bit odd if I didn't have that dimension to their lives. But it's in the background, and I don't really want to push it upon people. But it is there. So she sometimes thinks about her late father, who was a very important influence in her life, and her affection for her father and her father's memory is very touching. And we do get her speculating about what the life to be would amount to. And she says there's a heaven somewhere above Botswana, which is populated with, not only with people, but with white cattle. And the late children, she says, ride on the backs of the white cattle, which is rather a nice image, because cattle are very, very important in that society. So if one was going to go to heaven oneself in that country, you would very much hope that cattle would be there as well.
It's really beautiful imagery. I think we're going to pause now and take some music, and it's a track chosen by you. Can you tell us a little bit about this, Sandy?
This is the most divine piece of music. It's Mozart, of course, and it's an extraordinarily moving trio from Così fan tutti. And the words are important here because they effectively say, may your journey be a gentle one. May the winds that take you on your journey, that take your ship on its journey, may they be gentle and helpful, and may you reach your destination. They really are beautiful, beautiful words, and the music itself is gorgeous. I often play this piece of music when I'm writing, particularly when I'm writing the Isabel de Honhasi books. I would put Salve se il vento on in the background. There's a gorgeous resolution in it. There's a wonderful peacefulness there.
From Mozart's Così fan tutti, that was Suave sia il vento, performed by the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, and was the choice of my The Spiritual Life guest this morning, author Sir Alexander McCall Smith. Now, Sandy, whether it is Botswana in the #1 ladies detective agency or Edinburgh, where most of your novels have been set, including your two most recent novels, a sense of place feels very central to your books. Why is setting so fundamental in your writing? How does that sort of sense of belonging shape us?
Yes, place is so important. In many cases, we're defined, we're made by the place we grow up, the place we live makes us. It forms our attitudes, it affects the way we look at the world. And when we're reading a novel, we have to imagine where we are, what's happening. We have to imagine the setting. So it's very important that the writer should create that setting in the reader's mind. For me, place is probably the first thing that comes to mind when I start writing a book. I think place precedes character. I think of the place and then I put the characters into that place.
A fascinating insight into your writing process. And of course, we have you here today, so it seems fitting that we are asking you to do a reading for us. And you're going to read an excerpt from your collection of poetry, In a Time of Distance, it's called. Can you tell us first a little bit about this book and this collection?
This particular book I wrote after lockdown, when I think that we'd all been, by force of circumstances, distant from others and distant from our normal lives, in a sense. It was a very reflective time for people. So there are a number of poems there which are a response to what we all went through. But there are also poems about love, because love and friendship are very important themes for me. I think that if you looked at my books, you'd probably say those are the two main themes that I deal with in my novels. And of course, for most of us in our lives, questions of love and friendship are there right at the centre of our experience. And this poem is called Love Lost, and I'll just read the final verse from it. What we lose, we think we lose forever. But we're wrong about this. Think of love. When love is lost, we think it gone. But it returns, often when least expected. Forgives us our lack of attention, our failure of faith, our cold indifference. Forgives us all this and more. Returns and says, I was always there. Love, agape, whispers, merely remember me. Don't think I've gone away forever. I'm still here, with you, my power undimmed. I never left you. See, I am here.
It's a very beautiful sentiment that I think we all needed to hear post-pandemic. So love and friendship, these were the main two themes that you wanted to write about in this book, and central to your life as well?
I think so, yes, like everybody. I think all of us want to be loved by those around us, and sometimes that's difficult both for us and for them. But we all need that. We want to be appreciated by other people, and we want to share life with somebody, usually a particular person. That's a very basic human need. Loneliness is a terrible problem in our lives. There are many people who are lonely, and I think we would all wish that their loneliness would be relieved in some way by somebody coming into their lives. Loneliness really has major implications because it actually really affects people's health. I was reading a book recently which dealt with that issue and said that loneliness actually really harms the immune system. And once your immune system is harmed in that way, you're much more likely to fall victim to all sorts of diseases. So there's a very practical problem of loneliness there for the health service. Friendship is another theme that I deal with a great deal in my books. My Scotland Street series, which is a long-running serial novel set in Edinburgh, is really about friendship. It's about a group of characters who live in the Edinburgh New Town and their relationships. And friendship, of course, creates all sorts of moral problems for us. How do we deal with our friends? How do you end a friendship? Can you end a friendship? All of that sort of thing.
And that idea of connection is at the centre of one of your new books, The Perfect Passion Company. How has that theme of connection influenced this novel?
Well, I think that it's, I suppose, pointed me in the direction of dealing with how people meet one another and how they form friendships. And this new series, The Perfect Passion Company, is really about that, in that it takes place in an introductions agency, for want of a better term, in Edinburgh, what in the past would have been called a marriage bureau. I mean, the marriage bureaus still exist. They're less common than they used to be because most people now meet online. But there are still people whose job it is to bring people together. And I find that very interesting because those people have to be psychologists. They have to understand human nature. They have to be able to judge people. And the people come to this marriage bureau in Edinburgh and they come with their baggage, so to speak. And we see whether they can find somebody who's going to make life a little bit more bearable for them.
Now, another new book you're publishing is The Winds from Further West, and it's set in the Western Isles of Scotland, which has a special place in your heart. Do you think that there's something spiritual about being somewhere where connection to nature is so immediate?
Yes, I think that's right. I think we're much more likely to be in touch with the spiritual side of life in those surroundings. In that, when we see the beauty of nature, I think that leads us to experience it in a spiritual way. It's soulful, for want of a better term. I spent a lot of time in the west of Scotland, in the Western Highlands, and in particular, I like sailing, and so I'm often in those waters. That landscape or seascape, whatever you call it, is just so beautiful. Mm-hmm. So that sort of experience nourishes the soul. We all have a soul. People don't talk about souls very much, but there is something there within us. The contemporary term is the self. People talk about the self. Philosophers these days talk about the self. Is it the same thing as the soul? Probably, to an extent, but we need to remind ourselves that we have a soul, and we must nourish that soul or that self with art, with music, with contemplation, with all of these things. And some people, of course, will nourish it also with the religious experience. All of that is really terribly important. Otherwise, one leads a very shallow material life. It's interesting. I have a qualification in operating marine radio.
Oh.
I actually have my certificate. Really? I've got my papers. And when you're dealing with marine radio, when you're speaking on marine radio, if you're letting the Coast Guard know or other vessels know how many people are on board, traditionally you said there are 5 souls on board. You talked about souls. Yes. And I think that's lovely that you're talking, because when you talk about people as souls, you're acknowledging their humanity. You're acknowledging a whole aspect of them, which merely saying people doesn't do.
There's so many strings to your bow, and you have a beautiful way, of course, of describing the world, and it seems seeing the world as well. The world we live in now is so often bombarded with narratives about crisis and about conflict. Why is it important for us to have stories that are hopeful and uplifting?
Well, I think it is important. I wouldn't in any way decry the need to portray the harsh face of the world. The world is, in many respects, a vale of tears. You've only got to look around the world at the moment and you'll see why that is so. And literature must represent that, must portray that, but that's not the only story. Life is also composed of moments of exhilaration, of pleasure, of hope. And I think that literature should be balanced. We shouldn't just concentrate on the confrontational and the harsh. We should also deal with things which are positive and affirmative. And why not talk about that as well? I used to be accused of being a writer who looked at the world with rose-tinted spectacles. I had a lot of that. And people said to me, why don't you write about crime? Why don't you write about conflict? Why don't you write about disease? All of these things that actually are there in our lives. And my answer was, well, that's part of life, but that's not the whole story, really.
Wasn't he just wonderful? That was Sir Alexander McCall Smith talking to me just a few days ago, and his new book, The Winds from Further West, is out in August, so make sure you keep your eyes peeled for that. Now, after the news, Amanda Sondy, Laura Young and Fiona Stewart will be joining me to discuss some of the topical stories of the week from a more ethical and philosophical perspective. All that to come, but some music first. Here. This is Sunday Morning with me, Zara Janjua. I am with you until 10 o'clock when we'll be talking about some of the stories that are making the news, but we'll be digging a little bit deeper just to reveal what they tell us about ourselves, our faith, spirituality, and of course the communities we live in. Joining me this morning are Amanda Sondy, Senior Lecturer in Contemporary Islam at the University College Cork, writer Fiona Stewart, who also runs a Christian arts charity, and Laura Young, an environmentalist, a scientist and climate change campaigner. A very, very good morning and welcome to all of you.
Morning. Good morning.
Lovely
Good morning.
to have you with us. Now, just in a few minutes' time, we'll be talking about how challenging it can be to change our deep-seated beliefs and what we can sometimes learn from those who offer alternative perspectives to the status quo. With Andy Murray looking like he's coming to the end of his remarkable tennis career, there is a new documentary looking back on his life, and we'll be talking about that and also what it really does take to be that single-minded in the pursuit of a goal. Ever felt like the grim cycle of news stories is just too much and you've switched off? Well, apparently you're not alone. Apparently you are not alone, because there is a new report that suggests that more people are turning away from bad news stories. But what then are the consequences of doing that? That is all coming up before 10 o'clock. But let's take some music first, though. This
Baby, she's so
A recent report by Oxford University's Reuters Institute suggests that people are increasingly turning away from news stories because they find them just too depressing. 39% of people worldwide say they sometimes or often actively avoid the news, compared with just 29% in 2017. So in quick succession over the past few years, we've lived through unprecedented events. We had the pandemic, the outbreak of war in Ukraine, an economic downturn that has seen huge swathes of the population struggling to pay rent and buy basic food items, an increasing climate emergency, of course, and then there's been the Israel-Gaza war. So, I mean, it's a depressingly bleak list, and for those who live through them, their priority, of course, is survival, and they don't have the luxury of looking away. But what's going on with the rest of us exactly? Why are we disengaging, and what exactly could be the consequences of that? Well, diving into that this morning with me is Fiona Stewart, Amanda Sonday and Laura Young. Now, I'm going to do a bit of a round robin and ask you all, but Fiona, are you turning off?
I'm not turning off, but I'm being a bit more selective, I would say. So I think what you've just said is so true. That pile on of things when you list them, we realise what even in the last 4 or 5 years, what we've been living through. It's definitely, for me, certainly leading to a rise in kind of anxiety around what's going on. It can just feel overwhelming, I think. You know, it feels overwhelming. So I would choose to do more of a deep dive. I would choose to listen to the news in the morning. I'm old school, I listen to the news on the radio. I would listen to podcasts where there's a deeper dive, there's more conversation going on. And
are these sort of political podcasts?
I've listened to quite a lot of political podcasts, and that's quite interesting because I was listening to the media show this week and they were saying how this is the podcast election.
Yeah.
There's this proliferation of things, and that can become overwhelming in itself. You can spiral with all of that. And I would also buy a newspaper.
Oh, well done. I mean,
I'm a big fan of a weekend newspaper.
There's many people that will be fan of you for saying that this morning in the newspaper industry. Thanks, that Fiona. And just, Aman, what about yourself? Are you reaching saturation point with news at the moment?
I think there's quite a lot to be said about, you know, kind of looking away. And I was often, you know, I remember doing a thought for the day a wee while back when we were seeing so much from the Gaza war, and I sat to reflect, to think, is there a morality of looking away?
Yeah.
Because, you know, we're seeing images, and I think we're at an age where it's Instagram and Snapchat, and, you know, you see that, and I think sometimes you have to think about your own kind of mental health, because when we absorb so much, and, you know, I teach a course at the university on Islam and the media, and you know, the old statement of if it bleeds, you know, it reads. I think there's something to be said about that, and we know this in the media world where this is something that catches on. Those good news stories are far and few. You know, even when you're listening into the news, there's a funny story that comes at the very end, but it's after really gruesome stories that make you think, oh my goodness, you know. So I think there's a lot to be said, and I think you have to really protect yourself in this day and age from a lot of this news. And it's not to say to just completely look away, because we're all part of this world, we're all trying to create a better world, but there is something to be said about, you know, is it okay to look away?
Well, I mean, Laura, you are, I hope you don't mind me saying, but the youngest that we have on our panel, so you're representing that younger generation that we have potentially. Are you craving sort of more and finally stories? Do you feel like we need the softer touch, or are you still very much an avid news watcher?
I mean, it's interesting because I think I grew up in a house where my mum would go, oh, we need to go put Reporting Scotland on, we need to find out what's happened, you know, today. And it was that ritual. But there was that recognition that news came once or twice a day. That was your sort of slot. And if you didn't catch it then, you didn't really see it anywhere else, and you had to wait till, you know, tomorrow's papers. But I feel nowadays there's just a constant consumption of news, and it's almost trickled into spaces that were never news spaces before. So your Facebook, your Instagram, your Twitter, it wasn't really a news feed before. It was places for family photos or you know, silly videos or whatever it might be. But now it's that constant 24/7 consumption of news. And I always think back to, there was that time in 1930 where the Evening News in April said, today there is no news, and they just put on a song because there was nothing. Whereas now there's always something to be talking about. And as Fiona said, there's not only the news, there's now the news commentary. There's what people think about the news. There's that kind of, and what do we think about this? Let's debate this. And so it's not even hearing the latest headline. And I think for younger people as well, it's that can't really escape it. You know, it doesn't matter if you miss the 6 o'clock news, because guess what? Every 5th or 6th post that you're kind of scrolling past will have some sort of news edge. And I think that can be both a bit annoying if you're just trying to switch off, but it can also be quite consuming. And I think also something that's been really interesting is about how we access information. So before you would have the kind of standard big platforms that you would go to for your media, but now technology has meant you can get information from a variety of sources. And I remember kind of a scary thing, which was, you know, any time there's a disaster happening in the world, if you've got a young person in your life, ask to see this, because you can go to places like Snapchat. There's a map feature. You can zoom into that bit of the country. There'll be little hotspots. You can click on people and see what strangers around the world are posting about the thing. And so suddenly it's not just kind of news reporters and journalists,
There's like a
but
real
it's everyday
interactive
people.
element, yes.
Absolutely. But also, I guess that kind of brings in where you get your news from. Is that a trusted source? But there's that bizarre thing of I can go anywhere in the world through my phone and see
But
what
of
that
course,
news looks
because
like.
people are classically using, you know, Twitter as it formerly was, now X. You know, even when they're watching live programs or watching the news, because it's the commentary they're looking for.
Second
Not
screening.
Yes.
I only learned that this week. That's what it's called, second screening. So you're watching, but you're also on your phone, scrolling at the same time.
And is there just no escaping it, Fiona?
I think there's not. I got some statistics about the amount of information
Okay,
we've
hit us with
taken.
them.
Yeah, and it's quite old actually. It's from 2011. Americans took in 5 times as much information every day as they did in 1986. That's between 2011 and 1986. Is the equivalent of 174 newspapers.
Oh.
I know. And I mean, I went looking for statistics because I remember years ago hearing somebody say that someone in the 19th century, in the course of their life, would take in as much information as we, at that point in the 90s, I think, would get in a Sunday newspaper. Now, I couldn't find that statistic again on the web, but clearly the amount of information our brains are being asked to process is just growing and growing and growing.
But so, I mean, Aman, is it this information that, you know, are we just reaching the point where we've taken on too much information, or is it something more to do with emotion or feeling?
You know, I as you were saying, how much information, the amount of information, what I found really humbling is we're so limited because the majority of the news that I read and hear is in English. So what I've actually started doing is I've started attempting, because my Urdu and Punjabi is good, but it's not as fluent as in English. But I go and watch and listen to BBC Punjabi or BBC Urdu, and I'm just like, gosh, there's an entirely different world with all sorts of interest. I mean, there was a news piece on BBC Punjabi which talked about the Ravi River and talking about the river in Punjab, which is in India and Pakistan. And I was just like, I never saw that on BBC Scotland, you know. And it's just like, it's so humbling to see that there's so many parts of the world that's offering interesting news, but we're limited in our language, we're limited in our own brain, you know. So I think it's actually moving out of our comfort zone and maybe looking at other news. And it's a bit like watching international movies as well, which I've always done, you know, and I enjoy reading the subtitles, but it's humbling to know that we are so English-centric, dare I say it, and limited.
You've just thrown another spanner in the works for us, though, because not only have we been looking at social media, but I guess now we have access to, you know, other news forums and other news programmes all over the world. You know, certainly, you know, it is never ending. If you wanted to spend the entire day searching for and looking into news and learning about it, you certainly could spend days and certainly spend a whole day doing it. Fiona, I guess if you decide, let's say, you know, there's people out there, as we know from this study, this Reuters study, people are switching off. And certainly, you know, I, as someone who works in media, I've noticed myself watching and listening to, consuming a lot less. Maybe I'm telling myself I'm too busy. But, you know, the reality is that there's been lots of dark stories, lots of big stories. What are the repercussions if we decide not to follow those anymore?
I think you need to be intentional about that. I was reflecting on that in advance of today, because I was thinking there's a turning away that's a sort of choosing not to look that is unhelpful because it's choosing not to engage with it. But I think there's, because a man mentioned this, there's a turning away that's a helpful thing for our own well-being. So I think we need to decide how are we turning away, in a sense. So I was thinking about things like, it's a bit tied to the mental health stuff, isn't it? Going out for a walk or choosing not to be listening, just being in silence at points. For me, prayer would be part of that. Reading my Bible and kind of holding my Bible in equal hand with my phone, so that, my phone informs how I'm reading my Bible, but my Bible's informing how I'm responding to the culture around me. So I think thinking about it and being intentional is helpful. And I also think choosing what we do with the news, so we can consume, but what are we going to do about it? So are there particular areas of interest in the world that we really want to know more about, or are there particular actions that we could take, giving to charity or spreading news, with passing stories on with other people, using it to fuel, in my case, my creativity and in what I'm writing.
So I guess the repercussions of not listening, or if you do disengage with some of these bigger stories, is that potentially there's less action happening as a result.
So.
I want to come to Laura on that point, because Laura, you are a climate change campaigner. How do you stop yourself feeling overwhelmed? Because climate change has been a huge issue that I don't think one evening will go by on a news programme or one paper edition will be printed without having at least one or two stories in there about climate change.
Yeah, I think it can be quite difficult, especially because everything that we said in this conversation was about that kind of overwhelm. There's just so much. And with a topic like climate change, there's always a story that you can find. I think part of it is what Fiona touched on is, well, what can I do about it? It's asking that question. And sometimes that's to help guard yourself, to say, actually, there isn't anything I can do in this moment right now. So I need to just take this news in, sit with it and accept that, there's stuff happening elsewhere and I need to be okay with that. But other times you actually go, no, there is something I can do about that. I can go and try and make that change, make that difference. I can get in touch with someone who represents me, who's higher up, who can maybe try and make that decision. I can maybe look to my community, have a conversation. So sometimes it's about asking yourself, what can you do with this information? But I particularly think that setting boundaries is kind of important when it comes to all news consumption, but particularly on some of these hard issues. And I think this was a lesson a lot of us learned in COVID, because in COVID, I think, honestly, I would just sit and I was glued. I was glued to the TV, because importantly, though, because we were all thinking, I need to know what is today's update, what am I allowed to do, what are the restrictions, but it almost became a bit obsessive. We would kind of have, I know in our house, the TV was kind of just on all the time.
And that's what leads to the anxiety, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I think setting boundaries of how we consume. So for me, I'm the same as Fiona. I'm obsessed with podcasts, absolutely love them, but I've got a dog. So I listen to my podcast while I'm out with the dog, and depending on how many walks he gets, that's how many podcasts I listen to. And I sort of restrict it to that time. So I'm not sitting obsessively listening in the house.
It's some really good
in my spare
advice.
time.
Really good advice. And just briefly, I wanted to ask Aman, obviously, we're talking about turning off for stories. The people in these stories are unable to turn off from them. So, in terms of the compassion that we have, because it can be seen as maybe having a lack of empathy, or just demonstrating a lack of compassion when we say, oh, I just can't bear it, I don't want to watch that anymore. Just briefly, how do we hold on to that feeling of compassion?
Well, I think isn't that the tension, because I've also felt that there's been some people who have just not been able to maybe comment on, for example, the war in Gaza, and they've just and then they get called out, like, your silence is this, and why aren't you doing this? But I think what I'm getting from our conversation is that news should inspire us to do something good. It should inspire us to actually be good citizens of the world, active citizens. I was actually thinking, there was a big BBC News piece about Muslim Pride. It was one of the first Muslim Pride that happened in London. It was organised by Iman, the LGBTQ organisation that's been around for 20 years. And I was reading that and I was thinking, gosh, for a wee queer Muslim somewhere watching that or listening in, it must be so inspirational. So, okay, we moan and groan about the media, but there's so much in it that actually is inspirational for us to do good things.
I thoroughly enjoy your positive spin on this. And I'm wondering how many news producers will be listening to the programme this morning thinking that is going to be our new agenda for the year, to inspire people to do good. Thank you so much, Laura, Aman and Fiona. It's been really great to have your thoughts on this, and do stay with us because we're going to be talking about the challenges and value of changing our minds about long-held beliefs very shortly after this by Pulp with...
Hey, baby. Come on down. You don't have to be shy. We're just partying down. Yeah, we're gonna have big fun. Yeah, you can bring all your friends. We're gonna let it all hang out. Everybody have big fun. Party down. Get it on and let the good times roll. You only got one time around. Turn your lights way down low and play the music sweet and slow and make love together. Yeah. Everybody party down. Dance and sing, it don't cost a thing. Oh, it don't cost a thing. Everybody party down. Party with your lady. Get it on and let the good times roll. Driving one another crazy. Your kisses are sweet, but they're never the same. I just love to hear you call my name when we making love together. Yeah. Everybody party down. Clap your hands. Dance and sing, it don't cost a thing. Oh, it don't cost a thing. Come on and party down, y'all. Come on, baby. Hey, baby, party down. Everybody party down. Oh, no. Dance and sing, it don't cost a thing. Oh, it don't cost a thing.
Now, in a recent interview, writer and comedian Amy Poehler talked about the value of listening to young people, admiring their ability to look at the world differently and how they challenge assumptions and old ideas. So she said, and I quote, "Don't stop investigating yourself. The trap we all fall into is thinking we're cooked. It's like you turn a certain age and you say, there, I've got it. I know who I am. It never ends." Now, still with me is Laura Young, Amanda Sondy and Fiona Stewart. Fiona,
Yes.
give us your reaction to that quote.
Do you know, I feel a huge sense of relief when she says that. Because at 52, I don't think I'm cooked. Partly because I think I've still got more to give, but also because I just recognise, I think the older I get and the more I know, I realise the little I know as I go on in life. So I think there's massive merit in what she's saying about listening to the voices of the young and being prepared to be flexible and be challenged. I think there's something about So from a faith point of view, Jesus talks about being childlike, becoming like a child.
Yes.
And he doesn't mean childish. So it doesn't mean, foolish and silly and childish in that sense. But it's childlike, I think, in terms of curiosity and wonder and openness to new ideas and, desire to play, actually. So yeah, it resonates from that point of view. And I mean, she is a fool in the true sense of, she's a joker. She's somebody who pokes fun at authority, and she's somebody who's an improviser. And I really resonate with that. She's somebody who talks a lot about collaboration with other people and curiosity and.
Well, Fiona, I would definitely say you're far from cooked.
Thanks.
But I also think, when you meet people who have an attitude towards lifelong learning, a great attitude, and they embrace it, it knocks years off you. Honestly, if these companies, beauty companies, could bottle that into something, they would be able to sell it for an absolute fortune, because it does keep you very young, doesn't it? Now, I want to ask you, Aman, is there a time in your life perhaps where you've changed your opinion on something pretty remarkable, something that you held a solid belief in?
Well, I spent many years. My PhD was looking at Islam and masculinity, and I remember when I was going around talking about this book, I was challenged by a trans Muslim who said, "Why have you not written about me in this book on masculinity?" And I was very honest. I was just like, I actually didn't understand. I didn't understand trans lives. I'm being very open and honest about that. And it's taken me a long time to understand trans lives, and also to think about that from an Islamic theological perspective as well, because there's lots of discussions within Islam about the gender binary and talking about male and female and being married, and as I've kind of gotten into that, and it was that challenge that made me think, gosh, man, you know very little about this. And I think that was for me. I didn't change my view on that. I think I got a bit of a shove, and that was very humbling. But for me, I see all of this idea of fluidity and challenging the binaries directly linked to faith. As a Muslim, I think my faith could be strong one day but not so strong the next day, and it's constantly challenged. There was all sorts of Islamic traditions about testing a fruit to see how sweet they were, and God's testing us continuously to see how strong that faith is. And I find that really quite fascinating, and I'm very skeptical about people who say, I'm very I believe in God 100%. I'm like, really? Like, do you have doubt is so connected to faith, and I think that stops you from being stale. That makes you constantly being challenged in the same way that I was challenged by this trans Muslim man.
Well, I think religion is a really great point to bring into this, and it's one that we obviously discuss often on the programme. In my own family, we often discuss, whether it would be right to become vegetarians, or will I throw that into the mix? And as also coming from a Pakistani Muslim background, it's unfathomable for them to consider that, until we had a conversation about what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, might say about that now, in these days where we have access to food, and there's the supply chain is as it is in the world. If you have access to it, why would any animal need to die, really?
There's a movement, Sarah, every year at Eid al-Adha, which is the vegetarian Muslims come out and say we don't need to do this in order to strengthen our faith on this of our faith on the sacrifice of animals. And I just love it. It's such a strong movement, and it's just when it comes to Pakistani meat lovers, again, huge generalisation, but you know what I mean. It's just it's so humbling to think that there is another view, there is another way of being Muslim.
I think my family might be a little bit resistant to that, but I'm very, very open to showing them. Laura, I'm wondering with you if you could shed some light on maybe a time where you've shifted your thinking.
I mean, all the time. So my day job, all the time. I used to hate mushrooms, now I love mushrooms. I mean, that was a big one. No, if I'm honest, I mean, my job is I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher. So professionally, I'm supposed to change my mind. I'm supposed to
Yes.
draw up a hypothesis and test it. I'm not supposed to say, here's what I think is going to happen, and I'm not going to move from that. It's to say, here's what I think from all the amazing literature that we can find. I'm going to gather a hypothesis, I'm going to test it. And I need to be ready for at the end of my study to say, wow, I was right, I was wrong, or I've changed my perspective. And I think with all science, that's the point. The point is it's evolving. So if we looked at science 10 years ago, let alone 100 years ago, we would say, wow, we've changed, we've enhanced, we've been able to find new things. And, you know, for me as well, I'm an environmental scientist, so I'm looking at the world, I'm thinking about, you know, how things work, how things function. And hilariously, even in my faith, that's something that I've challenged. You know, I can look at the Bible, the first story, Genesis and creation, and some days I'm like, that is a word for word exact definition of how this happened. And other days I'm like, no, it's an inspired story because actually science blends with it. And I think that's part of it. It's about saying actually it's okay to be changing your mind as we get new information.
But you say that.
But it's also...
You say that it's okay, but let's be perfectly honest. I think people quite often are judged for changing their minds, particularly in politics. And so why is that? Why do we see that negativity around changing your point of view?
I think because it's seen as a weakness, right? And even in the kind of campaigns of recently, you know, you get terms like flip-flopping or U-turning, and it's got really negative connotations. And I think partly that's because we are obsessed with having very concrete policy lines, and we don't want to see anyone shifting because that's a sign of weakness. And what I would love to see actually in politics is more storytelling, right? For a politician to stand up and go, here's my policy that was on X, Y, and Z. I then sat down with this community and heard stories about how this is impacting them, and I just did not see that. And actually, we've taken that into consideration, and here's this new flourishing policy that we want to do. That would be so powerful. And I think partly it's about how we communicate those changes, that actually it's not a weakness, it's not a U-turn, it's not a flip-flop. Actually, it's about listening to the people of this country or the people of the world and going, wow, that's an absolutely brilliant new insight, and we're going to change to meet the needs of those people. So I think it's a strength.
Well,
but culturally, we need to change that.
That is a really interesting point. And obviously, you mentioned from being a scientist, you're working very much from the facts inwards, which is how more of. But, you know, in terms of having core beliefs, is there something that we could do? You know, are there benefits to just those never changing, being resolute in your belief system and unwavering? Fiona?
I think it's a both and, isn't it? I was thinking when Laura was talking about leadership, and I think there's a more of a move to be. We talk about influencers. We see people as influencers, and we recognise the power they hold. And I think there's a shift happening. I think there can be a shift that can go too far with that, because sometimes you do need people to stand up and say, right, in this moment, I'm going to take a lead. I'm going to be, take responsibility. And maybe my generation, an older generation, needs to do a wee bit more of that and say, actually, we've made some mistakes along the way here, and we want to recognise that, but also step into leadership. So I think it's a both and of. Sometimes leadership is called for that's direct. I think sometimes leadership is called for that's influential and flexible and that improvising characteristic. I think that I talked about.
Have, I guess, with leadership, they're looking at strategies, and in terms of business strategies, you would have a 5-year plan, and you don't want to change.
Work 5-year plans? I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. Somebody said they're a bit bogus, aren't they? Because you go back 5 years on and you say, oh well, circumstances changed, the world moved on, and actually my 5-year plan didn't hit as it should. So I think it's got to be the two together.
Do you think there's a generational gap in changing attitudes? Do you think that, it is a case that as you get older, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and young people are just far more open to learning and changing their points of view? Aman?
I don't know. I mean, I'm in the business of seeing, students from first year to fourth year graduating, master students, mature students. I'm not sure. I think that might be because I see I don't like this, putting them into boxes of conservative and liberal. But you know what I mean when I say that, because we all know what that means, And then I kind of see students, and I'm just like, gosh, where are these really, really deeply held, kind of rigid ideas coming from? And it could come from somebody who's 18, 19 years old, and then from the other side, it could be. But I'm not sure. I don't think this is an age thing. I think this is more about, I don't know. Some people just are very, very strong in their views and in how they understand that. But religion, I think, gives us the capacity to do that. I think religion at a certain level, especially religion of scripture, I think where people have said, no, that's exactly what it says, and you're just like, really? Is that really what the Quran says? And I think that I'm going to say that until I die. Is that really what the Quran says?
Well, because it's always open to interpretation, isn't it? And this is with religion and with scriptures, is there's very much a space for debate, and so in that there's colourful areas.
But that's what you're saying. But when you meet somebody who says, no, that's exactly what it says, and it's there's no other way, that's where you begin to see the hardened lines, and it's just like there's no scope. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because you have to keep saying it is a book and you're interpreting a book. But anyway.
Well, we've been talking a lot about beliefs and thoughts and facts, but in terms of values, Laura, how do values change over time? The things that you hold dear about yourself, that you like to tell people, this is the kind of person I am. Should those change?
It's the nurture nature. It's what's around you. It's what you grew up with. If someone's got a deep held value that they care for the environment, did that come because they went on holiday to beautiful bits of Scotland growing up, or did that come because they watched a documentary in their 20s or 30s and Blue Planet? What was it that gave them that? And I think partly it can be formed in a variety of different ways. But I think our values, I think a lot of them you grow up with. It's a lot to do with your experience. You see that because people give their time, they give their time to charities. And why do they give their time to that? Maybe it's because they grew up without what that charity is advocating for, and they want to give back their time. So I think they come from a variety of different places. But I think there is space for those to be changed. But I do think, coming back to that kind of young people thing, I think there is a formative time where your views are kind of moulded. If you've ever babysat a toddler, what's that? Why is that? What's going on? It's all these questions. And even going back, I'm interested in some of the words that Fiona used, kids sometimes being silly or foolish or childish. That's words we've put on it. Actually, are they free? They're free from all these things all this news that we've filled our brains with, that we were talking about earlier. Actually, I think there is that formative year where we form our opinions. And if you grow up around a diverse group of people and thoughts, and whether that's politics or faith or even just cultural ideas, you probably come out the other end a bit more open-minded.
Yeah.
And it's not your fault. It's not your fault if you didn't grow up in that space, but it kind of gives that when you get into those 17, 18, 19, years when you are then maybe moving away, maybe kind of experiencing this, how open you are to changing your mind because of that culture you grew up around.
Do you know, I think it's one of the greatest compliments you could ever give anyone that they are a free thinker.
Yeah.
I think it's lovely to have that attitude of lifelong learning and to just be adaptable. But I think if we are going to do that in society, it means we need to be a bit nicer to politicians. So depending on where you stand on that, you might not want to indulge. Thank you all so much for your insights on that, Aman, Fiona and Laura. Now, on this feverish sporting day for many football fans, we'll be looking at a new documentary later featuring a great Scottish sporting icon, Andy Murray, particularly the single-mindedness and personal sacrifice that it takes to achieve so much.
There are many party places across Scotland this summer.
The ones where we support our team.
That's golden goal! A priceless goal!
The parties where the music is turned up loud.
We've got the best live sounds and backstage interviews from the biggest music festival in the country.
Thank you so much, thank you.
And the ones that turn up on your doorstep.
Political parties are looking for your vote in the UK general election. Keep up to date with all the news from the campaign trail.
This summer, we've got all the big events of the season covered.
Listen on BBC Sounds.
It all begins when you play BBC Radio Scotland.
summer to you. We hope you're having fun. Whether it is raining or you're basking in the sun. Now here comes the bad news. We've had the longest day, so now it's getting darker and Christmas is on the way. The Chris Moyle Show. Happy summer, everyone. BBC Radio 1.
Now, if you're just joining us, earlier on in the programme I was speaking to Chris Cregan and Ellen Gelford about the visibility of the older generation of the LGBT plus communities as we celebrate Pride Month in this June. I also spoke to the wonderful, oh my goodness, he was fantastic, Alexander McCall Smith, about his life as one of Scotland's most prolific and popular writers, and he really is. He writes every single day. He's fabulous. Now you can hear all of that again after the programme on BBC Sounds. Just search for Sunday Morning with Sarah Janjua. And in a few minutes, well, what are the sacrifices that have to be made to achieve the single-mindedness required to pursue something you really, really want?
Do you know that some folks know about it, some don't? Some will learn to shout it, some won't. But sooner or later, baby, here's a ditty say you're gonna have to get right down to the real nitty-gritty now. Let's get right on down to the nitty-gritty now. One, two, nitty-gritty now. Yeah, yeah. Nitty-gritty now. Ooh-wee. Right down to the real nitty-gritty now.
Andy Murray, Will to Win, recounts the life and career of the great Scottish sporting legend as he approaches the end of his tennis career. And it's not only a reminder of his achievements, but it is also a study into the single-minded determination, really, and the sacrifices that he made to become a Grand Slam winner. And, of course, world number one. Here's a clip of Andy Murray from that documentary.
My goal is not to try and reach number one this year. I mean, I'd have to win pretty much every match between now and the end of the year. And I want to try and get there, but I don't think doing it by the end of this year is that realistic.
Andy Murray has only got won an 8th title in 2016 for the first time in his career. He would be the world number one.
the year that I've had to have to barely get there, like only just get there, is unbelievably difficult.
There's just something about that Andy Murray voice, isn't there? Well, that pursuit of success, the single-minded focus, hard work and sacrifices. Tonight we'll see Scotland play their final group game of the Euros, which of course has been years and years of training and commitment just coming together for probably one of the most important games of the player's career so far. But what about us? What about the mere mortals? Has there been times in our own lives when we've pursued something pretty much at all costs? Well, still with me is Amanda Sondy, Laura Young and Fiona Stewart. So first of all, Fiona, let's just get a little bit of reaction to that documentary. What did you think?
Oh, Andy, I mean, I found myself in tears, obviously. That moment at Wimbledon 2012 when he'd lost it and he had to stand up and do a bit of post-match interview, and he struggled, and it was a turning point for him, I think, that interview, actually, because it won people over. I mean, we heard it in that clip there. He absolutely is so focused and so knowledgeable on his own performance, isn't he? I found that really interesting. Nothing's really left to chance. So he was utterly clear on where we'd get to in his milestones and so on. But I was thinking, Sarah, I was thinking about the song that we've just listened to, the best thing that's ever happened to me. And it felt throughout the documentary, he had this single-minded pursuit of winning Wimbledon, winning the Olympic gold.
Yes.
But you were left with a slight sense of what's next.
Oh, okay.
You've got there, and it is the best thing that's ever happened to you.
So what now?
But you feel, I mean, even the fact that he's still talking about competing, he's got back injuries, he's had his hip replaced, he still wants to be out there on the court. There's something that keeps drawing him on, isn't there? So, I don't know, I was kind of thinking about satisfaction, and when we find satisfaction, when we achieve a goal.
When is it enough?
When is it enough?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Laura, your thoughts on the doco?
Oh, I mean, I'm the same. I think for for a guy who's not got a real passionate voice, he does bring you to tears. I don't know if it's just because you just feel the emotion coming out in a sort of odd way, but I know it made you feel proud, but I think also it just makes you realise how much work goes into that, and how, I mean, it's kind of nail biting. We obviously know the end. We know that he managed to kind of make his Grand Slams. We know he managed to win Wimbledon. But there is that feeling of, and there was a little bit as well, I thought, that was quite harsh in the documentary, saying, is he going to be another Tim Henman and not quite make it? And I thought, actually, that's another sporting great who did so much amazing stuff in his career. It almost feels kind of harsh to think, oh gosh, but I think, it's just how much. And I think I was also really moved by not just what it meant for him, what he sacrificed, but actually the whole community around him. It talked about his brother from a young age, thrashing him on the court, almost training him up, his mum and his dad, the people around him. But also, of course, we know there's that, deep, really sad history about the area and Dunblane, and just how that community was really rallying behind something positive, something so meaningful. And I think it made me think a lot about, actually, behind every sporting great politician, great celebrity is a real community of people who were willing to put in the work with them, to train them up, to give them time off school, to invest in them at times. And also the kind of places that are left behind, that are just kind of filled with that pride and that legacy. Dunblane has such a tennis legacy now because of him. So I guess that's what I was really thinking about, is actually often the people around the individual that can have that real impact.
Absolutely. And Aman, I wanted to ask you in particular about this, because you've been in quite a unique position, let's be honest, as a former Wimbledon umpire yourself. So you've seen Andy Murray play up close and personal. What was it like seeing that drive of his?
Well, it just, watching the documentary, and then it just kind of triggered me back to kind of the real emotion, which is really quite palpable on the court. Yeah. And I mean, these guys, and I'm using that in a genderless form here, but, these guys have worked so hard, and you can see the passion. And so when you see them smashing rackets, when you're playing singles, you're really battling with your own mind. I think anybody in the top 100 has a chance at a Grand Slam, but it's the ones who have the resilience in the head that are really getting that match point and getting it done. And you see that in Andy Murray, right from a very young age. So I was doing local tournaments in Scotland under 12s, and you can see the relationship that these very young kids are having with their parents, and their parents are in the stand, and you see there's so much emotion. So I got a little bit more up close and personal to this. And so when people would get really angry about, oh, they've smashed a racket, I would be like, you don't understand. It's just really very difficult to see that. But then somebody like Andy Murray has also gone through so much, as you were saying, Laura, the Dunblane massacre, I think it must have affected him and must have driven him at the same time.
I wanted to pick up just on what you were talking about there, though, in terms of, seeing young children play. And I'm going to come to you, Fiona, because, I think it's really important to look at, sports from a young age and the impact of that on children. Whether it's Andy in a Wimbledon final, or the Scottish football team playing a crucial Euros match like they are this evening. Both of those sports, football and tennis, and any sport really, it can often require that dedication from a really young age. What are we losing? Are we losing anything from our own experience as human beings from having a single-minded pursuit from a really young age?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. It's a really interesting question. I think I always think you've got to keep that balance, haven't you, of on the one hand enjoying the sport and doing the thing that you love doing. And I think that applies more widely as well to, so I think about my world, performing arts and people who love to dance, people who love to sing. You don't ever want to lose the love of it. And I don't think Andy Murray's lost the love of it. That comes across. He still loves tennis, doesn't he? But at the same time, in order to achieve, just like a man was saying there, the amount of pressure there is on an individual to really succeed at that level is enormous, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of sacrifice and
sacrifice on the part of parents as well. And you think about parents who go to
whole
the
families.
swimming pool at 5 a.m. for swimming trials, or drive their kids around.
And goodness, the less
country.
Talented siblings potentially that get dragged every Saturday and Sunday.
He's a good tennis player.
Laura, how about yourself? Is there maybe an element of childhood that's being lost through the pursuit of sport from a young age, do you think?
It's interesting. Well, I'm the sibling of a bit of a cricket superstar, so I don't like cricket. I think it's deadly boring. But my brother and my dad devoted to the sport, and my brother still plays. He's older than me, but and he played to a really quite elite level. And my mum calls herself the cricket widow, because it just felt like, actually, for me and my mum, the whole of summer was sort of this big blank space where we knew my dad and my brother would be off playing cricket, not only playing cricket, but helping at the club. There was all that stuff around it. It's not just the training, it's not just the games, it's, helping with the pitch, helping with the clubhouse, it's that community part of it. So I think I see it from the perspective of the rest of the family. I hope they don't mind me saying this, but there is this kind of hole that can sometimes be left. And I was thinking as well about King Richard, the movie that was made about the Williams dad, Richard Williams. And actually, there was a bit about that movie that you thought, oh my goodness, this whole family, their whole life was devoted to it. And I wonder what it feels like when it's not your single-minded goal, yet you're on this journey with the person that it is. But I think partly there's a bit of fun in it, and maybe that's about who's around you. Are you being supported by people that go, it really doesn't matter what the outcome is, as long as Fiona said, as long as you're having fun, as long as you're enjoying the training and the community. But it must be hard, if your goal in life is to do a marathon, it's a bit more likely than if it's to be number one in tennis.
And I think what we saw from the documentary is just how lovely it is when you finally do achieve that goal that you have set your mind to. And it was lovely to see that for Andy Murray, and who knows what will be next for him. Thank you all so much for your time and perspectives and wisdom this morning. Laura Young, Amanda Sondy and Fiona Stewart. Now, Andy Murray, Will to Win is actually now available for you to watch on the iPlayer, so you can go and check that out now. That's all for us this week, but there is plenty more coming up on the station today, as well as, of course, the game tonight against Hungary. Come on, Scotland. Now, the Sunday show is on in just a few minutes, followed by Off the Ball, and later, before the match, of course, there is actually a Euro special of your requests with Gary Innes. But we have just one last song released this week. Bye for now.